Okay, good morning, everyone. Thanks for coming along. My name is Erik Erskine. I work for a company called Anatech, based in Ireland and the United Kingdom. We do a lot of Drupal websites. We work a lot with public sector organizations and higher education and also local government. Some of the work that we're going to be looking at today has been done for the Local Gov Drupal project, which we're a big contributor. Migration, we're kind of guilty, as I think a lot of people are, of going into migration projects with a very optimistic view that actually it's going to be something like this. Most of it will be okay. Some of it might need a little bit of work. And sometimes we find ourselves midway through a project that the reality is a bit more like this. So I don't know if anyone else can relate to this. So what to expect from this talk? First of all, I'm going to talk a little bit about the more challenging aspects of the migration, the big kind of red blob we saw. Then I'm going to go on and talk about, going to show you a tool that we built for LocalGov to import single pages. And then I'm going to wrap up by giving a bit of a technical overview of what's behind that tool and some of the modules that we're working on contributing. So we'll start with this, looking at some challenging aspects of migration. And before we do, I want to go and have a little bit of a history lesson and look at the origins of how the Migrate module actually came about. And we have to go back to the changeover from Drupal 7 to Drupal 8, which was very late, very different, a complete rewrite, and there was critically there's no upgrade path. You couldn't take a Drupal 7 site and click upgrade and have a Drupal 8 site. So the Migrate module was written to facilitate that, and it gave you, the idea was that you would have your Drupal 7 site, and in parallel with that, you'd have a Drupal 8 site, and you would run this tool, and it would copy over all your content and all your configuration, your users, everything, from one to the other. And that was very successful, and it became a successful ecosystem for migrating from other tools as well. And it works really, really well for clean and well-structured content. If your content is clean and well-structured, migration is generally quite easy. So let's look at some clean content. Here I have a list of events, all mapped to some nodes on my Drupal site, which would have a date and location and description, all very, very neat, very, very tidy. So we'll look at some of the characteristics of those. We can see that the data is in a tabular format. We can see that there are 4 events. There could just as easily be 40,000. Each thing has something to identify it on the source, which we can map to something on the destination. That's neat and tidy. I'm assuming that the fields for these things in those Drupal nodes, the structure is the same on both sides. And Migrate gives us tools to do a lot of stuff with this. We can repeat this migration, update the data, we can roll it back. We even have nice things like high watermarks for saying, well, only take the events from since the last time we ran the migration, all things like that. But what does messy content look like? It's the opposite of that. So once you start deviating from this, your work gets more challenging, more difficult. So how do we, what can we do to help with that? So one of the first things we do at Anatech on any new project is a migration analysis. We look at the client's actual data we see what's there, we see what shape it's in, we see what's missing, we see what needs to be reworked, and we learn a lot through that process. We get to understand the project that we're working on, and we actually find that things in that analysis phase dictate what we're going to build later on. We had a university site that we built with courses and start dates for those courses, and some of we just thought there was a date for a start date, but it turns out that certain types of courses would say, well, it starts in September 2026, and certain types of courses that say we'll start on the 5th of September. So we ended up, kind of that analysis meant, okay, we have to now think, how are we going to handle these dates? With some of them have a month, and some of them have a day and a month, a year. And we had to write a custom field for that, because we were going to need it in search and filtering. So we decide things like what's going to be automatic and what's going to be manual. We kind of accept that, some things lend themselves to being scripted, those events. Other things are going to be, you just don't bother. You just say, well, we're going to do it again. Maybe because it's a one-off. Maybe because it is that the client wants to rethink their content architecture at the same time. And also that not all content is equal. Your blog post from 2015 is probably not going to be given the same treatment as your top 5 landing pages. So migration has a lot of data coming in. We try and have some kind of output for each input. Even if that is just a very basic, okay, we'll output this as text, and that's the best we can do with it. So going back to those blog posts, those old blog posts, we might just say, well, actually, you have this accordion on one of your blog posts from 2015. We don't really have anything for that in a new Drupal site. So actually, let's just put the text in, heading text, heading text, and then we go back to the client and say, well, look, this is your baseline. This is what we can do with the budget available. You can choose that, or you can pay more money to have something better. And then we like to give a sort of report of how we're doing with migration. So I've got an example at the moment where we have a very large insurance site. They've built their entire site with HTML. We're parsing it and mapping it to individual blocks in Layout Builder. And because this is quite unusual in that somebody has written HTML for several hundred pages and copied and pasted, and things have changed. And sometimes we find something that just doesn't fit. What we have, the new model, and we will leave that in there as it is, but we'll also give them a report and say, look, here's what we've been able to do, and here's what's left and what's outstanding, and kind of gives a good idea of progress. And we talk about setting the expectations of the client, and what we sometimes find is that, we have this, we do all the easy stuff, and we say, right, 80% of it is done. And client thinks, okay, 80% is done, that's good. I had a big task at the beginning, a big onerous task, and now I've got a much smaller task. Excellent. But very often the reality is a little bit different, and 80% done can actually look like that, where, okay, each individual page is done, 80%. There's something on every page. Now, if you're depending on how people interpret that, that's risky, because if you think about that and you've spent 80% of your budget, you have no idea. You have no idea what that actually looks like in practice. So we need to. The report is a good idea. Is a good way of breaking that down. So we actually say, yes, this bit's done. No, that bit's not done. Rather than just seeing this whole long list of things which are nearly done, but nobody really knows quite how close they are. Going to go on and talk about a few little red flags that we find, a few little things that we flag. Firstly, when somebody says it's just HTML, because we find all sorts of things in HTML and things, who's actually responsible for correcting this stuff? Then you think, well, we've come across this extra little thing on a page, a map on a page. We didn't have a component for that, so how do we handle that? This is another one that sometimes a CMS will have its own idea of its sort of mini structure. And, if we haven't got our styling right to handle that kind of stuff, that won't look like the 2 paragraphs that we actually want it to look like. And sometimes HTML is just overly verbose, and there's just a lot of stuff that we don't ever need and we don't want. Are we okay just to take it on board, or do we need to do any kind of tidying up of this stuff? And as a risk of going off on a slight tangent, I want to talk a little bit about Drupal's formatted text field. And I don't like thinking about this as being the same as an HTML field, because there are some subtle differences. The way that it works is that you have some sort of document-like structure stored in your database, and then your field formatter will do certain things to it. The media module will get involved, link it will get involved, other things will get involved. So we have this. Yeah, we need to understand that there's a difference between what's actually saved in a formatted text field and what appears in the browser. And I found it really helpful to think of CK Editor as not being an HTML editor, but as something that will arrange tiny little mini components within a body field. So you've got a heading, you've got a paragraph, you've got a media thing, and we can just sort of drag them around and save it. The second warning is when you have a difference, a discrepancy between what you had on your old site and what you have on your new site. Now here we got an address, and it's just text. Could be anything in there. But on the right, we need a map, so we need to split it out into fields. Now, if this comes up in your analysis, it's good, because you can say, well, actually, we don't have the data to support the map. Maybe it can be added later. Maybe the map is an optional thing that gets shown on a page, and if the address is plain text, well, that's okay, we just don't see the map. Or maybe the map is central to a search, geographical search or something, in which case you need to go back and say, hey, we don't have the data. How do we address this problem? Do we do some extra work to parse addresses, or do you go in and add addresses? We did a site for another university, and they were migrating courses from 4 different content types into a new one, actually within the same site. And we're fortunate that we're actually maintaining this whole site, so we could actually go in and add in some extra fields that were never displayed. And then we asked the client to go in and populate these fields ahead of time. And someone had a job of editing 200 nodes and putting in the metadata that was required for the new site, because then we knew that the new site wouldn't function if this metadata wasn't there. Third one is try not to get your data sent to you by hand. When people send us spreadsheets and CSV files, we nearly always It always seems to happen that we get variations, particularly when we have somebody send us something at the beginning and then something much later on at the end. People forget to do things. We often find discrepancies with date formats and character encoding. Those two seem to crop up way more often than they should. I think the moral here is if they're going to send you stuff, do it early and do it often. The more often that you do it, the more you can build a repeatable process. Put a README in that says, do these things, click this, click that. Or be proactive about what you want and kind of set it up in ahead of time. We had another client that we worked with where we needed some content in a really specific format. We needed a list of pages and whether we should migrate them and whether they should be in the menu, where various other things. So we set up a Google Sheet and shared it with them and said, right, column A, put the title, column B, put the URL of the old page, column C, put some other metadata. And he said, right, you fill that in, and what's in that spreadsheet gets migrated. And that works really well because two things. One is if there was if there's anything that I'm unclear about, we said, well, let's have a quick call and we'll go through this together and sort it out. And then you can carry on filling in the sheet. And then we actually said, right, Google Sheets has an API, so we wrote a migrate source plugin to read directly from that sheet. And so that became the canonical source of truth for what's coming in. And we sidestepped a whole set of steps that are error-prone in people exporting spreadsheets and importing them somewhere else, copying files around, all bypassed. Okay, going to move on a little bit and look at some work we're doing for the local gov Drupal project. I'll start with a bit of a case study. So Luton is a town in the United Kingdom. It's just north of London. We worked with them to move their site to local gov Drupal recently. They're very happy with it. They've gone live a few months ago. Near the end of the project, one of our PMs came to us and said, oh, they've got a request, can we help? And the request went something like this. Luton have about 100 pages of historical election results they would like migrated. We have to scrape them from the live sites. They contain PDFs. And I thought, oh, this isn't really great because, well, first of all, we've got about 100, and that's not a nice number to be working with migration. If it's 10, okay, clearly we know what we're going to do. If it's 1,000, yeah, we'd do that differently. But when you've got 100, and you think any kind of development time divided by 100 is not a lot, and it starts to get quite expensive per item. And okay, we're scraping stuff from a site. It's definitely not clean content. It's definitely going to be messy. We're going to find all the things that we just seen. We don't know what kind of gremlins we're going to find in there. And lastly, they've got, okay, it's not just HTML, it's media as well. So we have to find these PDFs. We have to download them, make media entities for them, and update the links to point now to the media entity rather than wherever they were before. So I thought, I hope I don't have to estimate this. I hope he doesn't ask to estimate this, because whatever number I come back with is going to be both too high for the client and too low for us simultaneously. It's just not going to be right. And then, sure enough, asked for an estimate. And almost anticipating that this would be a very difficult answer would be, actually, do you know what, maybe we shouldn't bother. Maybe we should just say no and do this by hand. And I think this often kind of, this sums up a lot of estimates for migration, you kind of think, oh, I don't know if this is even worth it, you know. And sometimes we find ourselves at a point where, oh, I wish I'd done it by hand. It's like I've now spent more time developing it than I would have done if I'd done it by hand. And that's a horrible feeling. So we didn't want to take this project on. So we said we can't migrate this, but we will help you do it, because we had we had done some of this stuff before. We'd done all this idea of when I see a media, or when I see a URL somewhere to an image, go and fetch that and come back with a media entity. And we had a bunch of stuff for dealing with HTML, and kind of Luton were in the right place at the right time, really, with this, because we thought actually we could put this together and we could do a tool to kind of help somebody say, right, for when we say, well, actually no, we can't do this. It's nice to have an alternative. You don't just want to say no, sorry, but it's a lot easier if you say, okay, it's not feasible to automate this, but alternatively, here is a way in which you don't have to do all of the stuff yourself. And to cut a long story short, we've kind of evolved this into a generic sort of thing for local gov Drupal. So I'll show the what we did for Luton first. So this is their old site with the PDFs. Now we've got the name of the. Actually, I'll pause the video a bit. It's going a bit quick. Okay, it's going to run. We've got the name of the media item we want down here, and we've got the PDF. So I'm going to take that URL, I'm going to paste it in here. We gave them this idea that actually when you submit this form, the node will be prepared, we'll do what we can, and we'll then leave it with you to finish off. So it pasted it in, it scraped the site, it's pulled off, it's pulled out some things. Now the editor is going through and doing some tidying up. We see there's all the stuff is there, the links are there. That should be a heading, I think. Yeah, that's going to be a heading. And we're going to take out that copyright message, which we didn't really want. And now I go ahead and publish it, click save, and I have my page. And that was, what, 2 minutes of editing. And they can do that 100 times. Media is here. PDFs are there. If we go to list of media items, there they are. And I can edit those and tidy up anything there if I need to. We then took that one and said, okay, let's try it with a different. Try if we can do something that's not just for Luton Council, but for any local gov site. And we said, well, let's look at news articles. Now we found this site. It has nothing to do with local gov Drupal. It has nothing to do with any of our clients. I just found this as a something that you could imagine being a legacy council news website. And I found this article, and I thought, okay, we'll try and migrate this, and so let's see what that does. We'll let this one play. Same thing, really. I'll go and click and import. I've got this same thing. It's telling me where possible, fields will be populated. Where possible, media will come along. And now we're going to do the news. Downloading. Few glitches. But I've got title, I've got date. I should have an image and the text. Now, the summary is missing because we didn't really know what to do with that. So that's a job for the editor now. Okay, they're going to say, right, I don't want that big image there. this thing which was a heading 2 to make it larger. We don't really want that, it shouldn't be a heading 2. I'm going to paste in the summary with that text. And I'm going to go through and delete this banner, which got picked up because it was inside the element. And I will publish that. Save it. The news article is there. Image is there. Now, that wasn't just magic. It wasn't like there's a certain amount of development work there, which we'll see in a minute how these modules work. But essentially, what I did was I said, okay, we know we need. We have to think, okay, what does this source page look like? And for both those cases, we had to write some custom stuff to say, okay, I know what my incoming page looks like. I know what the element on the page is that I want to consider to be the main content. And then I'd say, well, news, I know I want the date, and I know that comes from an element inside there with a class of date. And I know the image is just going to be the first. We're just going to look through the main content and come to the first IMG tag that we see, and take that as being the main image. So there are assumptions made about this particular project and this particular demo where we had to write something, but the amount of code that we're writing for that is so much less than we would have if we tried to automate this. So let's look a bit about let's look a bit behind the scenes and see what's going on here. We have a few modules, 4 of them that are doing this. 2 of them are relatively stable. We've been using them internally on several projects, and they've gone from being an internal tool to sort of gone through a few renaming and refactoring processes to being something that we could upload to a content module. The first one is the media on demand module, and the remit of this module is really, I have a URL. Go away, download that, get me a media entity. So it facilitates anywhere we come across ad hoc data, ad hoc reference to an image. We can now say, right, take that URL, we now have a media entity ID for whatever data we're saving. And we wanted to wrap that up into a single function, which you could use in whatever you're using. But okay, I have this little fella here, and we need to get him into Drupal. So we call a function, and we give it the URL, and we give it alt text. And what it's going to do is going to go away and download that data, download that picture. It's going to create a file entity for it. It's going to create a media entity for it. It's going to set the alt text on the media entity. And the second time we call it, it's not going to do that. It's going to say, okay, I've already seen this. I've already seen him. He's this one. It's created the media entity. There he is. The second time we run it, it's not going to do that again. It's going to say, okay, I've already got the puppy. It's the same media entity. And all of that logic about all that downloading stuff just happens behind the scenes. So it's not even, we don't think about it now when we're doing migration. We just say, I have this tool that can say, go and get the data, give me a media entity. And we wrote a UI for this as well because we kind of came across another problem where when we had some content being migrated automatically using that, and we had a migration, people doing it manually, people were going in and downloading files, like literally clicking or saving it off the screen and going into media add and uploading it again. And we didn't know that we'd end up with duplicates because we had no way of matching up the two. And it's sort of not too much of a problem for images, but when we got into documents and things, it was a problem. So we wrote this little form we say, well, actually, rather than uploading things by hand, go to here, and it will go through the same process we've just been looking at. So the same process for the code-based thing, and you just fill in this form, fill in the alt text, get image, and it will take you to that image, or be it one that's just been downloaded, or be it one that was downloaded earlier. Second module is for transforming HTML. And the remit here is take some HTML, do some kind of transformation with it. We found that we were doing this a lot with little things here and there, and there'll be all sorts of little hacks for changing things. There'll be a regex for looking for images with a local URL and turning it into a relative URL, absolute URL, turning it into a relative URL, that kind of thing. And no real consistency in what was happening. So what this is just a more formal way of doing all that stuff. So we have now a system where a developer can write a plugin to do one little thing, and then all of that kind of gets, you just say, I want to change these things. And then we can call it in one place. We can say, right, transform the HTML as we want. Do everything we want in the right way. And we have nice little things like saying that some of these things need to run in a particular order. Got a few examples, some specific markup here that we want to turn into a slightly different thing that perhaps CK editor knows about. Relative links, another one. We find, if there's links to URLs, we want to strip out the domain name. We find a lot of empty paragraphs in text. That's quite a nice thing to remove. But probably the one that makes the most difference is when we go to do another plugin, which uses the media on demand module we've just been talking about. Because now we can come across this image tag in HTML. We can straight away, in one go, turn it into the Drupal media entity that we really want. And what happens is the file gets copied, the media entity gets created. All that happens behind the scenes as a kind of side effect if it needs to happen. All we need to think about is, right, I know I have some HTML text, I know I have some formatted text that I know, run it through this and everything will be taken care of. Third thing, we wanted a generic way to say, okay, I have given a node and a document, populate the node some way, do something. When those two demos ran, there were a few things that were going on. One of them was looking for the H1 tag, looking for heading 1, and setting the title. It's actually falling back to the title element in the header. And that was used on both examples. The image, we've just been talking about it. It was used on the news example. And the body one was used for the Lutheran Council example, where we said, okay, run through a whole bunch of transformations, and one of those was to do that PDF mapping, so take the actually looking for one of those rows in the table and saying, like, take the text from the first cell and the link. The text within that row was the media entity name, and the link was the URL. So this is these all use plugins. There's not really any. It's not a product that we can use. It's a tool for developers that does a lot of the heavy lifting. It gives the developers a lot of stuff that they can use to make it easy. Next one is the page importer. Last one's paging portrait. It doesn't really do anything other than pull everything together, really. It gives you a form with a URL and asks you to fill in that URL, and then it goes away, calls the various, calls the population, and that does the other things, and we come back with a pre-populated node that is ready for editing. And that's the interface that you saw. So thank you for listening. And got a few minutes for questions if anyone has it. No? Okay. Thanks.